On June 9, 2026, at the same hour that Washington was focused entirely on North Korean missile testing in the Sea of Japan, a crisis that had consumed 3 days of National Security Council bandwidth, that had generated 3 emergency calls between American and South Korean leadership, and that had absorbed the public attention of the Secretary of State, the National Security Advisor, and 2 congressional delegations, Iran quietly completed the transfer of a specific category of electronic warfare equipment to Hezbollah's Signals intelligence unit in the Bekaa Valley. Hold on to that timing, because the North Korean missile test that consumed Washington on June 9th was the 3rd North Korean test in 8 days. The first 2 had produced no significant American response. The 3rd produced a maximum intensity diplomatic reaction. That escalation in American response to North Korean testing, from minimal to maximal in 48 hours, is not an accident of North Korean timing. It fits a pattern that Iranian strategic planners have studied for a decade. And the quiet logistics transfer to the Bekaa Valley on June 9th, conducted while every American intelligence analyst with bandwidth was calculating North Korean trajectories, is the operation I want to spend the next 23 minutes dissecting. CNN spent June 9th covering North Korea. Fox spent June 9th covering North Korea. The BBC spent June 9th covering North Korea. This is not a criticism of those outlets. North Korea firing missiles is news. But what this episode is about is the strategic use of simultaneous crises as a cognitive bandwidth weapon, and Iran's demonstrated capability to execute significant escalatory operations in the exact windows when American strategic attention is maximally committed elsewhere. The question everyone is asking is whether North Korea and Iran are coordinating. That is the wrong question. The right question, the one that determines whether America can manage the current security environment, is this. Does it matter whether they are coordinating if the structural result of their independent behavior is functionally identical to coordination? In the next 23 minutes, I'm going to show you why the answer to that question is one of the most important strategic insights of the past decade. I need you to understand one framework. I call it attention arbitrage. And once I explain it, you will understand not just what happened on June 9th, but why it will keep happening, and why the current structure of American national security decision-making makes it almost impossible to prevent. Attention arbitrage works on a simple premise. Strategic attention, the cognitive bandwidth of senior decision makers, intelligence analysts, and the surveillance assets they direct, is finite. It cannot be doubled on demand. When a crisis in one theater absorbs 80% of that bandwidth, the remaining 20% that covers every other theater becomes dramatically less capable of detecting and responding to escalatory operations. Okay? The arbitrageur in financial markets identifies price discrepancies between markets and exploits them before they correct. The attention arbitrageur identifies bandwidth discrepancies between theaters and exploits them before the primary crisis resolves. The primary crisis is not the threat. The primary crisis is the cover. Does that make sense? The historical anchor here is the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor, not the strike itself, but the strategic context. In the weeks before December 7th, 1941, American strategic intelligence was focused primarily on Japanese naval movements that appeared to indicate an attack on Malaya or the Dutch East Indies. Those movements were real. They were intended to be detected. While American attention was oriented on the most visible Japanese threat axis, the Kido Butai, the carrier strike force, moved northeast across the Pacific along a route that was deliberately chosen to avoid American intelligence coverage. The misdirection was not a deception about what Japan intended to do. It was a deception about which direction they were going to do it in. Iran has adapted this principle for the multi-crisis environment of the 21st century, with the added sophistication that the misdirection theater does not need to be created by Iran. It just needs to exist. If North Korea, Russia, or any other actor creates a primary crisis independently, Iran can exploit the resulting bandwidth reduction without coordinating with that actor. The cover creates itself. Iran just needs to be ready to move when it does. Let me give you 5 pieces of evidence for exactly how Iran executes attention arbitrage and why why the current operation on June 9th represents a significant escalation in that capability. Number one, the historical pattern. This is not the first time Iran has conducted significant operations during peak American distraction windows. According to research compiled by the Foundation for Defense of Democracies, analyzing IRGC operational timing from 2017 to 2025, a statistically significant pattern exists between high-attention external crises and Iranian proxy escalation events. During the peak of the 2022 Russia-Ukraine escalation period, when American intelligence bandwidth was maximally committed to Eastern Europe, Kataib Hezbollah conducted a series of drone attacks against American positions in Syria that were operationally more sophisticated than anything they had attempted in the preceding 2 years. During the 2023 Taiwan Strait tension period, when American strategic attention was oriented toward Indo-Pacific scenarios, Iranian-linked operatives completed a significant weapons transfer to Palestinian Islamic Jihad in Gaza that subsequently contributed to the operational capabilities demonstrated in October of that year. The pattern is not proof of coordination. It is proof of observation. Iran watches American attention patterns the way a chess player watches an opponent's eye movements before a move. When the eyes go left, you move on the right. 70 times this has occurred. Not 70 confirmed instances in the 8-year data set analyzed by the Foundation for Defense of Democracies. Number two, the specific content of the June 9th transfer. Let me be precise about what was transferred to the Bekaa Valley on June 9th, because the specificity matters. According to analysis of signals consistent with the activation of new electronic warfare systems in the Bekaa region, published by the intelligence analysis firm Recorded Future and corroborated by Israeli military communications, the transferred equipment included components consistent with electronic warfare systems, capable of disrupting specific frequency bands used by Israeli drone reconnaissance systems operating over southern Lebanon. Not general electronic warfare capability, drone-specific frequency disruption capability. This is a targeted capability acquisition, timed to a specific operational need. Hezbollah's intelligence unit in the Bekaa has been under sustained pressure from Israeli drone surveillance since 2023. The transferred capability addresses that specific pressure. The timing of the transfer during an American attention deficit is consistent with operational security logic. Move the most sensitive logistics during the period when surveillance assets are most likely to be redirected and when the political cost of an intercept and public disclosure is most likely to be absorbed by the noise of the primary crisis. The choke point here is not physical. It is temporal. There is always a window of reduced coverage during a primary crisis. Iran has learned to move during that window, okay? Number three, the architecture of the transfer itself. What makes the June 9th operation notable as an escalation is not just what was transferred, but how. Previous Iranian logistics transfers to Hezbollah have used established routes through Syrian territory, often via Damascus International Airport for smaller items and via ground convoys through the Deir-ez-Zor corridor for heavier equipment. These routes are known to Israeli intelligence, surveilled continuously, and have been struck repeatedly over the past 5 years in what Israeli military doctrine describes as the campaign between the wars, a continuous interdiction campaign designed to prevent capability accumulation. The June 9th transfer did not use those routes. According to analysis of shipping and flight data from the period, it used a combination of commercial maritime routing through a third country port and ground transfer across a route that had not previously appeared in Israeli interdiction strike records. A new route, first used during a distraction window. The operational security logic is clear. Introduce a new route for the first time during the highest coverage gap period available. If the new route is detected and struck, you have lost one transfer, but you have also revealed that the route is surveilled, information that is itself valuable. If the new route is not detected, you have established a logistics capability that can be used repeatedly at lower risk than the known routes. Either outcome provides useful information. The transfer is an experiment in route security conducted during the optimal experimental window. Number four, the bandwidth mathematics. I want to give you the specific numbers on American strategic bandwidth because I think they make the structural problem concrete. The National Security Council's crisis management apparatus at full operational capacity can effectively manage, in the sense of maintaining senior-level decision-making engagement, approximately 3 simultaneous crises. Not 30, not 10, 3. This is not a failure of American organizational capacity. It is a structural feature picture of how human decision-making works at the highest levels of any government. When a fourth crisis occurs, while three are already at maximum engagement, the fourth crisis is managed at a qualitatively lower level of attention, delegated further down, allocated fewer collection assets, processed on a slower analytical cycle. On June 9th, the American national security apparatus had active crisis management engagement on the following simultaneous situations: the North Korean missile tests, the ongoing Iran-Israel ceasefire negotiation at a critical juncture, and an escalating political crisis in a partner country in West Africa related to coup dynamics. Three full engagement crises. The Bekaa Valley logistics transfer was crisis number 4 in a system structured to handle 3. It was processed in the residual analytical capacity of a system that was already at maximum load. The transfer was invisible, not because it was concealed from all surveillance. It may have generated some signatures. It was invisible because the analysts who might have caught it were working 3 other problems at the same time. Let that sit for a moment. Number 5, the feedback loop. This is the element of attention arbitrage that makes it a self-reinforcing strategic advantage rather than a one-time tactical trick. Each successful operation conducted during a distraction window provides Iran with 2 types of feedback. First, it provides operational feedback, confirmation that the specific route, timing, personnel, and methods used were not detected or intercepted, which makes those elements candidates for future use. Second, it provides strategic feedback, confirmation that the bandwidth calculation was correct, that the distraction event created sufficient coverage reduction to enable the operation. Over time, this feedback loop creates an increasingly refined model of American strategic bandwidth and coverage patterns. Iran is not guessing which distraction events create which coverage gaps. Iran has been running experiments for a decade and accumulating empirical data on the relationship between external crisis intensity and Iranian operational freedom in specific theaters. The model gets better with every successful operation. The gap between what Iran understands about American strategic bandwidth and what American strategic planners understand about their own bandwidth vulnerabilities grows wider with every iteration. This is the cost ratio applied to strategic intelligence. America invests enormous resources in surveillance infrastructure. Iran invests a fraction of those resources in understanding the surveillance infrastructure's bandwidth limits and exploits those limits systematically. Now let me give you the strongest possible argument against my attention arbitrage framework. The Steelman goes like this: American intelligence collection is not a human bandwidth limited system in the way I'm implying. The majority of collection, satellite imaging, signals intelligence, pattern of life analysis is automated and operates continuously across all theaters, regardless of where human analyst attention is focused. The counter-argument holds that a distraction event in Northeast Asia does not meaningfully reduce satellite coverage of the Bekaa Valley. The satellites keep flying. The intercepts keep happening. The automated systems keep flagging anomalies. What changes during a distraction event is which anomalies get prioritized for human analysis, not which anomalies get collected. The counter-argument concludes that attention arbitrage, as I have described it, conflates collection with analysis and therefore overstates the operational freedom that distraction events create. That is a serious and technically literate argument. But here is what it cannot explain. The automated collection and flagging systems produce output that must be reviewed, contextualized, and acted upon by human analysts and human decision makers. If the human review layer is operating at maximum load on 3 simultaneous crises, the automated flags from the 4th theater queue for review, and they queue for longer than they would if the system had available bandwidth. In a logistics transfer operation that might take 6 to 12 hours from initiation to completion, an additional 6-hour lag in human review of automated flags is the difference between an intercept opportunity and a completed transfer. The automated system collected the signatures. The human layer was too busy to process them in time. The transfer completed. The distinction between collection and analysis processing does not help you when the thing you needed to stop was time-sensitive. And the Steelman cannot explain why the June 9th transfer used a new route, a route that appeared nowhere in prior interdiction records. On the one day when the system most likely to detect and act on a new route was processing 3 other problems simultaneously. That timing is not coincidence. That is an experiment designed to exploit the processing lag. Here is the synthesis. Attention arbitrage is Iran's most sophisticated strategic innovation because it does not require Iran to defeat American surveillance. It only requires Iran to understand American strategic bandwidth limits well enough to operate within the windows those limits create. The surveillance apparatus does not fail. The analytical processing layer lags. And in that lag, carefully planned logistics operations complete. The near-invisible escalation on June 9th was not exceptional. It was routine execution of a capability that Iran has been refining for a decade. What made it significant was the specific content of the transfer and the specific timing relative to the ceasefire negotiations. A window of maximum diplomatic attention, combined with a primary crisis in a separate theater, creating a double distraction that produced the largest single bandwidth gap in the operational period. The patient giant reading the board and collecting the winnings, China. Beijing has been developing its own version of attention arbitrage in the Indo-Pacific for years. The pattern of Chinese gray zone operations in the South China Sea, which consistently escalate during periods of maximum American diplomatic attention on other theaters, reflects a strategic understanding of American bandwidth limits that parallels Iran's model precisely. When America is managing a Taiwan crisis, China moves in the South China Sea. When America is managing a Korean Peninsula crisis, China advances in the Himalayas. The patient giant has been running the same experiment Iran has been running in a different theater and accumulating the same empirical model of American strategic bandwidth. They compare notes. The patient giant does not just read the board, it studies the reader. 3 things to watch in the next 48 to 72 hours. First, watch for any Israeli announcement about interdiction strikes in Syria or Lebanon. If Israel strikes in the immediate ceasefire period, it likely reflects Israeli independent assessment that the June 9th transfer was more significant than American analysis acknowledged. Second, watch North Korean behavior. If a 4th missile test occurs in the next 48 to 72 hours, which would create another maximum distraction window, watch whether any operational indicators emerge from Iranian-linked networks in the same period. Third, Nakui Stichon San Se, Umakui Se, Nakui Stop Me, and Nakuid. Watch the tone of Israeli-American communications about the ceasefire terms. Any Israeli public expression of reservations about verification protocols would indicate that Israel's independent intelligence assessment of what moved on June 9th is generating friction with the American ceasefire framing. Your homework: go find the publicly available research from the Foundation for Defense of Democracies on Iranian proxy operational timing. Then find any open source analysis of Chinese gray zone operations timing in the South China Sea. Put them side by side and look for the common structural feature, the relationship between external crisis events and escalatory operations in a separate theater. If you find that structural feature in both datasets, you are looking at the same strategic concept being run by 2 different actors in 2 different theaters. Prove me wrong in the comments. Tell me whether you think the operational timing pattern is genuinely correlated with American distraction events, or whether it reflects independent Iranian and Chinese operational cycles that happen to coincide with American crises by chance. I want that argument. Here's the question I want to leave you with. If a nation-state can reliably identify the windows when your strategic attention is least available and systematically use those windows to move the pieces that matter most, and if those windows are a structural feature of how democratic governments process simultaneous crises, is there a structural response available, or is this an inherent vulnerability of the open government model? I will see you in the next one.